Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Government Oversight Committee. Thank you for being here. We're going to start with committee introductions. On far left, Senator Guzowski.
Well, thank you very much. I am Stan Guzowski. I represent Senate District 24, which we all know is beautiful downtown and scenic Brunswick, the rolling hills of Pownell, the working waterfront community of Archbald, the shopping and natural resource mecca of Freeport, and recently added the beautiful little village of North Yarmouth.
Good afternoon, I'm Mike McClellan. I'm the representative from, I live in Raymond. I serve House Seat 66, which includes Raymond, parts of Raymond, Casco, and Poland.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Senator Bill Diamond. I represent Senate District 26. I live in Wyndham, and my town's circle, Saviello Lake.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Davis, and I represent Senate District 4, which is all of Scottsbluff County, parts of Somerset and Penobscot. And it's where all those fly rods that come from LLB get used.
I'm Bob Duchesne, the representative from House District 121, which is Alton, Argyle, Guilford, Corinth, and Hudson.
Chuck Kruger from Thomaston, the House Chair, also representing St. George, South Thomaston, Botanicus, Haven, and Cushing.
Good afternoon. I'm David Burns. I represent Senate District number 6, which is some of the most beautiful parts of coastal Hancock County, all of Washington County, and I can't wait to get that.
Good afternoon, I'm Anne Marie Mastracchio. I represent House District 18, which is part of the city of Sanford.
I'm Dick Campbell. I represent District 130, which is Bucksport and Orrington. It's so nice to see most of the committee on Environment and Natural Resources in the audience.
Good afternoon, Senator Chris Johnson, representing mostly Lincoln County. So all the towns from Monhegan, 12 miles offshore, to the inland towns of Windsor, Somerville, and Washington.
Good afternoon, I'm Deb Sanderson. I represent House District 88, which includes Chelsea, Whitefield, Jefferson, and part of Noblesboro.
Thank you. I'm Roger Cates, and I get the smallest mileage check in the Legislature. I represent Augusta, China, Oakland, Sydney, and Gossiboro in the Maine Senate. Let me just run through how we're going to proceed this afternoon, and what we're doing here and what we're not here for. But just so that everybody understands, this is not a public hearing. We're not going to be hearing from anyone today. There will be plenty of opportunity for that at a later date. But today we're going to go through the requests that have come to the attention of our committee and OPEGA. We're going to take a quick review of the statute under which we operate. We're going to hear from our director a proposed scope of work that we might want to consider, and then we'll have a discussion about how the committee wishes to proceed or not to proceed. As we begin, I just want to say a couple of things. I know the Chairman Kruger does as well. The events of the last few weeks involving Good Will-Hinckley are troubling. And as often happens in partisan politics, it seems like at least some people immediately go to their corners and are getting ready to fight. But I think it's also fair to say that most people in Maine just want to know what happened in a fair and open way. And as Joe Friday used to say on Dragnet, just the facts now. And I think that's where our committee and OPEGA can come into play. For those of you who don't know, this committee is unique. It is set up by statute to be very different. We have 6 Republicans and 6 Democrats, no matter which party is in power in either house. And those people, I think, are chosen, generally speaking, for their ability to be fair and to be impartial and leave our politics at the door. And I hope as we go through this process today, as I always do with the committee, if no one's ever been here before, you're not going to be able to tell who are the Republicans and who are the Democrats. So the question for us is, do we have any role in this? Does OPEGA have any role in shining a light on this troubling chapter in our public life? And if we do, proceed, I can assure people that OPEGA and this committee will go about it in the right way. Chairman Kruger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wrote up something thinking about where we are and what we have in front of us. And yesterday we saw passionate people from all over the political spectrum converge on the State House to express their opposition or support for the Chief Executive. As legislators, we're all hearing from excited constituents about our governor's action and his style. The job of this committee and OPEGA is to find facts and not draw conclusions. It will be up to others to act, if appropriate, on the facts that we find. As committee co-chair, all I ask of our members is to be deliberate, thoughtful, respectful, and open-minded. The challenge for us is to focus on the task at hand, try our best not to get distracted by tangential issues. But above all, we must all remember that this review is not about Republicans or Democrats, independents or unenrolled. It is about the people of Maine and making sure they're getting the best government that we can get.
Thank you, Chairman. So for those of you who are not familiar with this committee, we assign tasks to the Office of Program Evaluation and Governmental Accountability, and we do so on the basis of requests from legislators. And when we get a request, this committee considers those. And we're here today because we've had 2 such requests. And Director Ashcroft, if you could summarize those requests for us. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. Beth Ashcroft, Director of the Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability. Both letters are behind tab 1 in your binders. You probably have seen them before. And I think what's particularly relevant is they both have been submitted due to concerns on the part of their requesters, as Senator Cates and Representative Porter have referred to. The first letter comes from Representative Evangelos, Warren, and Chipman. And what I want to particularly draw attention to is the piece of the letter that really outlines what they hope a review by OPEGA, as they requested, would include. I'm sorry. Is that the first one that you have in your book? Second one, I'm sorry. If we could go to thinking of that one because it came in first. But in the bulleted list there, they're requesting an OPEGA investigation of the facts surrounding the situation and the funding involved, specifically the scope to include, but not be limited to, the funding allocated and threatened to be withheld, any actions taken by the governor to withhold intended payments, any relevant communications between the governor and the governor's office, the Department of Education, the Good Will-Hinckley School, the Alphon Foundation, and any other relevant entities. They have a specific request that if the findings that come from an OPEGA review, in addition to our normal reporting protocol to you and to the legislature at large, that the findings be directed to the House of Representatives for consideration under the authority vested in the Constitution of the State of Maine, Article 4, Part 1, Section 8. So point that out to you as part of their request. The first letter in your binder is from Senator Saviello. Again, there is a portion of the letter that speaks to what he hopes a review would include or proposes that it includes. That is, 1, to outline an appropriate scope of investigation to reasonably determine whether allegations of political use of state resources are justified. 2, review the allocation process for funding specific to the Good Will-Hinckley situation. 3, review the allocation process of other discretionary funding available to the administration. And 4, report any examples of improper or potentially inappropriate discretionary use of state resources. So those are what the requesters have proposed to be part of their requested review.
Any questions from the committee with respect to the nature of the requests we've received? Thank you. OPEGA, Government Oversight Committee oversees OPEGA as a creature of statute. And just to take a second to talk about that statute, about what the authority is of the office, I'm going to read in part from Chapter 37, Section 991. OPEGA is created for the purpose of providing program evaluation of agencies and programs of state government, also to ensure that public funds provided to any agency or nonprofit corporation are expended for the purpose for which they were allocated, appropriated, or contracted. So that's the universe in which we are operating. And to help at least steer the discussion, Chairman Kruger and I have asked Director Ashcroft to come up with at least a proposed scope of work that we might at least consider. Might like it, might not like it, but at least to begin a discussion about where we might go. So, with the committee's permission, I would ask you to do that, and we can start discussing. Senator Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had one quick question, which I think maybe the director can clear up, and that's in Senator Saviello's letter number 4. Do you think it was his intention to have this appears to be a broad part of the scope? If you had a chance to talk with Senator Saviello, do you think that he's looking at that kind of a broad?
My understanding of that is, I have to admit, only from what I've read in the paper, where I think Senator Saviello indicated that he set it out broadly, but he understands a more narrow
So
scope
it could
might
be, should be shrunken. Thank you.
Okay. I think just for those who aren't familiar with the office in this committee, the normal process when a review request comes into the office or to the committee is for OPEGA to first take a look at whether the subject matter fits within our jurisdiction under statute and is in line with the committee's own policies and procedures that it has set forth. In this case, given the timing of that, we have done that in concert with the chairs and with input that I always seek from the Attorney General's office with regard to interpretations of our statute that Senator Cates has read part of. For the rest of you who might like to refer to it, it's behind tab A in your books, the very first section of the statute there, section 991. Based on all of that consideration and what the requesters have requested, I have developed a proposed scope which keeps the review to fact-finding only, as the chairs have just mentioned, does not draw any conclusions on or about whether actions fall into particular categories or descriptions, because we don't have good standards. OPEGA would not have good standards by which to even make a comparison to be able to draw a conclusion, and I really think those are best left to those, as Senator Cates said, would make use of the facts that we might find. So the potential scope, would you like me to hand it out in writing? Do you have that? Is to determine the facts associated with alleged proposed changes to the state funding for Good Will-Hinckley for the upcoming biennium and any impacts to the school of those changes. The focus, of course, is on the funds, and I do feel that between that and the fact-finding, it's my opinion that we are well within our jurisdiction as OPEGA and as a committee.
Perhaps you could read that a second time for those people who don't have a copy.
Sure. And Edith has some extras, so she'll put them out when she's done. To determine the facts associated with alleged proposed changes to state funding for Good Will-Hinckley for the upcoming biennium and any impacts to the school of those proposed changes.
So at this point, I'd like to open this up to discussion of the committee to react to that. This does not presuppose that we are going to vote to do anything, but it's simply put out there for purposes of starting a discussion. Representative McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm reading the definition of where you can work, and I guess the governor, I think I read in the paper, said that this organization has no reach into his, and I'm reading, I'm wondering where you're where you're inferring that you can examine his case.
Specifically, the challenge to our authority was around whether we could investigate the governor's use of his executive authority and whether that was the authority that he used was justified. First of all, we're not going to make a judgment about or a conclusion about whether it was justified. We're only going to determine the facts. And the funds under Section 991, our authority to determine and follow funding, state funding, has been consistently supported by the Attorney General's office any time that I've had to ask for an interpretation of our statute, and so that is where I draw that. Good Will-Hinckley is a nonprofit corporation, so this would be state funding to a nonprofit, which are specifically covered under the statute. and we would be performing research in terms of fact-finding, which is within the definition of the work that we are set out to do for the legislature. Does that answer your question? It does mention office, any state defined agency, that helps you further. State agency means each state board, commission, department, program, office, or institution, educational or otherwise in this state. That is item number 6 under section 992 definitions. I take that to include the office of the governor within the confines of the other pieces of our statutory purpose.
Yes, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just heard you say you inferred the governor, factoring him in as being a state agency.
It was also this office, yes. I said that falls under the definition of a state agency as laid out in the statute.
Before we get to Representative Shane, so folks know, the chief executive, through his counsel, has sent us a letter suggesting that because of separation of powers issues, that this committee ought to have no role in going forward, as is his right to assert the separation of powers issue. We have consulted with the Assistant Attorney General, Linda Pistol, on this issue, and the scope of work that's set out here was crafted with her advice in mind. Representative Shane.
Yes, thank you, Senator. I think I'm testing my own understanding here, and I think it gets to the heart of your question as well. I think the funds we're actually looking at, if I'm correct, are in a budget line of the Department of Education, which would be a department that would easily fall within the scope of what we do. We review executive departments all the time. And so we're actually we're focusing on those funds, how they were used, and were they used appropriately, and that would normally be well within our scope.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Trying to choose my words carefully here. We have a lot of concerns that have been expressed by constituents in the public around the alleged reasons and actions in altering that funding, letters sent that expressed reasons and conditions of funding. And I would hope that we would find that within the scope of this to determine the reasons, the communications regarding the changes in funding.
I think anything that mentions the funding would be within scope here, and that includes whether or not it was going to be paid or provided or appropriated or any of those.
Thank you, Senator. Could you give us an idea, of, assuming we were to move ahead, the time frame in which you might be able to operate it, and how OPEGA would proceed to try to get these facts out?
Sure. Well, as you know, this committee has the ability to tell me whether it wants particular projects to be prioritized, and certainly I also listen to that, but it is within my responsibility to determine the schedule of OPEGA reviews. There are some that come to our attention that it's just obvious this is of a timely nature. If you're going to bother to do it at all, it ought to be done right away. This is one of those. It would not make sense to sit around and wait to start this at some other point. So although we are fully engaged at the moment, I would find some resources to get started on this. And I think given if we stick with a scope like this that's pretty defined, then I think we could accomplish that within a timely manner for you and get what we could for facts together and report those out.
And could you lay out for us the actual work that your staff would do?
I envision that it would be primarily reviews and review of documents that we would seek to obtain.
Senator Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Remind me, I've been on this committee a long time, but I still need to be reminded, your legal counsel, do you need legal counsel? Is it the Attorney General's office, or have you in the past engaged private investigators, attorneys, whatever that may be?
If we are looking for interpretations of state law or something like that, I usually do first turn to the Attorney General's office to see if they can give us an interpretation. So far, that's been all that we've really needed on any particular review, and they've been very responsive in working through with us what an interpretation might mean. I do believe that I have the authority to spend OPEGA resources to hire independent attorney or counsel should we find need for that, or this committee would find need for us to do that. But we have not.
Would you be able to do that on your own? or would
Actually, I
you need-
can't say that. We did hire a bond attorney when we did the Maine Turnpike Authority. Yes.
And you feel comfortable calling upon this committee if you develop the need to do that?
Yes.
Representative Shane.
Thank you, Senator. And just to clarify, OPEGA works a little bit independently of the Government Oversight Committee.
Yes.
We assign tasks, we help you scope it out, and then the organization runs on its own to accomplish its mission and reports back findings to us.
That's correct.
So you are a rather independent organization.
Which is why I like to have agreement on the scope so that I can commit to what I'm going to bring back to you.
Thank you, Representative Scrocchio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could we just have a little bit more, I just am curious about the timeline too, because we're in a period of time where people are on vacations or, we're supposedly at the end of legislative session to go on. So I'm just curious, what our schedule would be and how we would be involved in and what your part is in this.
Well, supposing that you were to vote today to put this on our work plan or otherwise tell us to gather some other information for you, we begin on that. And I think we were already working to schedule a July meeting of the Government Oversight Committee. So barring that everything's going smoothly with the review, we would just be reporting to you on our status of it up until the point that we were done. Should we run into or encounter any problems with obtaining cooperation, then those are issues that I would normally bring back to the committee and anticipate any of those. But a July meeting or subsequent meeting is when we would seek to put those before you.
And with respect to that, I take you're talking about if you make requests for documents, for instance, with an entity and are not getting cooperation, there are some things that this committee could decide to do.
Right. If there's going to be an impediment that we can't get what we need for me to bring you what we promised, then, and I think that this committee can be of assistance in helping us get those, then that's when we have that discussion.
Chairman Kruger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question about acquiring documents. Is there any compulsion on the part of state agencies to provide them in a timely fashion, or is there, could we anticipate that it would take an extensive period of time to find certain documents or locate them?
We generally have very good cooperation from the agencies, but that doesn't mean that they're always in a position to turn something around the next day. We understand that. So there's usually sort of an ongoing, there's a discussion about what's a reasonable time frame for them to provide them in, and we keep bugging them until we get them. Depends on what we're asking for, whether I would consider a week or a month to be a reasonable time frame, and that's where we end up having that discussion with them. And if I think it's become unreasonable, I would have it with you.
Good Will-Hinckley. Is that going to include details for the entire discretionary budget that's housed within the DOT, or just specific funds for Good Will-Hinckley alone? I would like or prefer to have an entire picture of that entire account, some of which I know is mandatory spending, some of which is discretionary to spending, and initial proposed budget, changes within the budget, and the actual dispensation of where all of this money did actually end up going. Is that possible within this scope, or is it too broad?
That was not envisioned as part of this scope. The committee is always free to ask us to add on another piece to whatever it is that we're going to do. It would, of course, elongate what we were going to prepare for you, and maybe that is a piece of information we could examine as a different special project, because it's not quite of the same approach that I would be taking on this. I'm not sure if OFPR might already be able to provide some of that or not.
Thank you, Senator Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's an interesting request that Representative Sanderson has made, and I guess I would ask if she could elaborate a little bit as to what the value of that would be, so I can think through this process.
Representative Sanderson.
Well, in part of the information gathering process, as we're trying to weed our way through the swirling information coming from all angles at us, there's been a lot of information talking about funds that had been initially transferred from there to other areas, and I think that's important for us. If we're taking a look at the overall funding processes of the schools, where that, if the money was there in order to help support this discretionary fund, and it was moved, where did it go?
Representative Strachio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But it just seems to me that if what we're looking at is state funding for Good Will-Hinckley in the Department of Education budget, if you start with that and then it leads you somewhere else, then you will come back to us and say that that's a natural progression. To me, by broadening that scope, then we're just going to lose sight of our focus. And I thought that that was the whole point, is that we're looking at this issue and trying to shine some light on it and make sure that we have the facts. And when we go out into the hinterland, sometimes I think I'm not saying that it might not lead us there, but I think we need to start in a very focused way. And that's how I'm looking at it. I'm looking at this potential scope as pretty well written for what I envision us doing.
I'm not sure I hear anything different from those two perspectives. Actually, this I don't know much about this, but this money came from a discrete account within the Department of Education. And the question about what was the intent for those funds and how did they actually flow out of that account, I would suspect is something you'll be exploring as a fact finder in any event. Is that fair? Discretionary. Well, discrete and discretionary.
My basic understanding of that overall fund at this point in time is that there are a number of pieces of specific, where specific pieces of funding would go out of that account. So yes, we could catalog what all of those are as part of this review, but to then take every one of those and explore, okay, has there been a change, or is there intended to be a change in each one of those, and what transfers have been made between accounts? That is a different piece of work than trying to explore what the impact has been and the plan has been for Good Will-Hinckley.
Yes, Representative Sanderson.
Well, for clarification then, if we could narrow it down to maybe what the fund is there for. I know there are some specific accounts that are mandatory throughout there, such as the School for the Blind. And then there's other lines that have been included as discretionary, maybe a little more in-depth overall list of what you just mentioned may be appropriate, and I will perhaps dig other places to try and find a different trail for more of the information that I think is probably necessary in gaining some insight.
Thank you. Representative Shane.
Thank you, Senator. I think we may be on the same page. I draw our attention to the fact that we have a specific request from legislators, which is our process. The legislators asked us to look specifically at this particular issue. Now, to the extent that one way you would analyze that is to see if this account was treated differently than other accounts, you would certainly, maybe as part of the process, look to see other budget lines and how decisions were made about those and see how those decisions compare to this particular issue. You wouldn't do all of the budget, you wouldn't do all of the Department of Education, but if there's some analogous ones that might be worth using as compares, that would certainly be an appropriate way to go and still limit the scope of this to what we were directed by our legislative colleagues to do.
If I could just say, in terms of what we report back, including a description of the nature of the fund from which all of this stems, that was already part of what I would include to be within the scope of here. That was part of what I was imagining we would need to provide you for background and context. So to be clear, what that wouldn't include was us getting into each one of those pieces and saying, has there been changes to that, and what has happened with all of that funding specifically. But certainly in terms of describing what is this fund, how is it broken down, what kinds of things are in it, we would do that as a natural part of background to this. To speak to Representative DeShane's piece, yes, a logical piece of this might be to look at how changes for funding to this item differ from how they normally handle changes to funding for any of the items in that particular budget. So that, I would imagine, already being within the scope of what we've laid out here.
Thank you. Representative McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a comment and a question, if that's okay. The comment is, I mean, these are allegations. Nothing, I mean, there's no budget to look at. Is there? I mean, nothing has happened. Money wasn't sent somewhere. I mean, we're being told there was threats made, but I don't know that you can look at a budget and say, oh, this all happened, because nothing had happened yet. And I want to get back to Rep. Sanderson's, I thought you were going somewhere else and tell me that I guess I'm wrong. I actually have, I think, what you're talking about, the miscellaneous, I'm on the education team, so I actually have it right here. But I thought what you were getting at, Representative, was the flow when it hit the school, and that's not what you were talking about. You're just talking about how money is here retreated, which again, I guess I wonder if it hasn't happened yet, how we can do that, but thank you.
Would you like to respond, Representative?
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I was really more asking for was perhaps an Excel spreadsheet on what monies were in that fund, and I think that falls in very closely. If I can point out to Senator Saviello's letter, number 3, bullet points, review the allocation process for other discretionary funding available to the administration, and that would include other discretionary funding within this overall big fund piece. Perhaps an Excel spreadsheet on what was proposed in this budget, what was changed in the overall budget. I know there's a line for miscellaneous funds, and it would be very interesting to find out how that relates to any of the Good Will-Hinckley allocations. And maybe I'm not being clear here, but...
So you're talking about the original budget proposed by the governor compared to the budget you just passed?
Yes. What were the changes, and where were they?
My understanding of how the budget process works is all of this would have been appropriated to general purpose aid for local schools. There would have been a line for personal services and a line for all other. In the all other line, somewhere in there, is this miscellaneous account that includes the stuff for Good Will-Hinckley as well as any other number of entities. Unless they changed the budget line overall for general purpose aid for schools in such a way that we would be able to see it all the way down to some sort of subset, which I don't know if that's lined out line by line in any sort of accounting system. I'm not sure I would be able to take that to that level of wording. But
Thank you. Representative Mastracchio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to ask the chairs for some clarification because I heard Representative Sanderson said something that I'm always concerned about being a member of this committee is we don't participate in this investigation. And so I guess I'm here to see what information you get. But when I heard her say, I'm going to look into whatever, I just think that, I guess, am I misunderstanding what we're supposed to do? Or is did I just misunderstand what Representative Sanderson said? Because I just want to clear to everybody that I don't intend to do any investigation myself.
Well, I don't think there's really any inconsistency there. And just so everybody's clear, I think we're saying now for the third time. Once we task OPEGA with a particular scope of work, we are out of it. In fact, if you go into her office and ask her what's going on, she's going to tell you that she can't tell you.
Correct.
And that's the way it should be. On the other hand, the report will come back to us at some point in time, and we'll have an opportunity to ask questions about it and decide what, if anything, we want to do. And to the extent that it's an educated group of people being able to ask those questions, that's great. Representative Sanderson and then Senator Johnson.
If I may respond to the representative, if this is not part of a scope of what OPEGA would be doing, then I don't believe there's anything that prevents me from, out of curiosity and a true knowledge of wanting to understand the flow of money in certain accounts, where there may have been a question from just asking for the information of where did the dust finally settle.
Thank you. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And from what I've heard so far, I think that the scope you proposed is about right. We don't have any alleged actions or concerns expressed in any letters or anything that's come to us regarding the budget as a whole, regarding the education budget as a whole, how that decisions have been made about what amounts to fund in that portion of the budget. So I think that what you're looking at here and where that may lead to is an appropriate way to begin this investigation of what's been alleged and the requests that have been received.
Thank you. Representative Campbell.
Thank you. I think the budgeting process and the funding in terms of background would be important. This budget that we just passed was fairly unusual. It didn't come from an open process, and there were a handful of people that put it together. So I think the process of where funds were allocated, where they were moved, might be of value.
That is well outside the realm of what the requesters have put before you and what I was envisioning tactically when I laid out the scope. Again, I think if that's something that this committee would like to see done, to me that would be an entirely different project than the one that I've outlined for you.
Senator Diamond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question that Representative Sanderson asked, I think that getting information I think that would be helpful, but I also think it needs to be controlled. And I also believe, having an understanding of the Appropriations Committee and how it functions, that a lot of that information is going to be helpful to us is already there. And looking at the information that Representative McClellan shared with us, that also is already there. So, I think if we can just pull that in, and I think all of us, by the way, are going to not investigate, but we're certainly going to ask questions as we go through the process, and I think that's very appropriate. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other discussion? All right, seeing none, I think the next thing in order would be a vote after we complete our discussion, but I knew Senator Exhausted would have something to say before the afternoon, so.
I never missed this opportunity. And it's a pretty small, basic question. We've gone through this before, but we're going to have a scope of work Secretary will be looking into. But if there was any sign of improprieties that came into that scope, you're not locked in a box that you can only work in. You're still going to be aware of what else is being brought in.
And you may, correct me if I'm wrong, you may come back to us and ask for a redefinition of the scope of work based on that. Senator Burns.
Thank you, Senator Cates. Since I first heard about this situation or the concerns about this situation, I've been trying to think through the process like I think all of us always do when the potential of it coming to government oversight is real. Trying to think whether or not this is the appropriate venue, because I think that's first and foremost what we have to consider. This is the correct venue. And because I always ask that question, are we the ones to deal with this committee in OPEGA, or is there another entity that's would better serve this purposes? And as you have narrowed this down here to the use of state funding, I think I've come to the conclusion that this is probably the most appropriate forum to answer these questions of all the ones that I'm familiar with. I certainly would be glad to hear from anybody else on the committee that can think of a better venue to vet this, at least this question that's been put before us. But if we keep it to a narrow scope that's been proposed here, I really think OPEGA and government oversight is the right venue. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Further discussion? We've heard the proposed scope of work. Is there a motion? Senator Diamond, seconded by Representative Campbell. Discussion with respect to the motion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? excuse me, before the vote. Pardon me?
Is the motion to put it on our work plan with the scope as proposed?
Yes, that was the motion.
Okay, great, thank you.
You read my mind very well. Further discussion on the motion? All in favor, please indicate. That's 11 to all present, 11 voting yes. All right. 12? I thought we were missing something.
Right here.
If you're worried that I'm on Appropriations Committee, you should be. All right, so from this point forward, we are out of the picture, and the OPEGA will begin to do the work. But we are going to be meeting over the course of the summer, and I think one of the things that Director Ashcroft mentioned was the fact that she anticipates getting cooperation from the agencies and others with respect to requests for production of documents in particular. And we're all optimists about that. But it may not come to pass. So we've got to be back in session on the 16th of July. And I want to throw out the idea that this committee would meet either that day or the day before or the day after, just so we could get an update from the director about where things stood. Does that make sense to people? That would be our July meeting.
We would have other items for the July meeting too. Hopefully Commissioner Gervais would be available so that we can get back to the discussion about the economic development program thing. So I just wanted to be clear with everyone that there are other agenda items that I would like to put before you.
So Edna will poll people to see what might be most convenient. Probably not the 16th, the day before, the day after. Representative Sanderson?
Just for clarification, Senator, putting it on the work plan, does that also come with a directive from the committee to elevate that to an immediate attention point?
I think that's been the flavor of the discussion, but do you need further direction on that?
No, I think I already told you that it would be my own view that this needed to be acted on in a timely manner. So we will get started.
Thank you. So I think we have completed that agenda item. I don't think we have anything else on the agenda. Anything that anyone in the committee would like to raise before we adjourn? Yes, Representative Strachio.
I just want to make sure, when will we know whether we're going to meet the day before or the day after? Just because, and I will just bring it up, because I don't know that anybody here, but the potato tour is scheduled that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday now. We have a session on Thursday. I'm just saying that, I'm not saying that I'm going to go, but I just want more general information.
We generally meet on Fridays. Do people comfortable about committing to that Friday right now? Is that the 17th?
17th.
Is that agreeable to everybody? We'll schedule 9 a.m. on July 17th.
I may be a problem.
We'll tentatively schedule on the 17th. See how that hands up. Okay, any other items of concern to come before the committee? Is there a motion to adjourn? All in favor? You're adjourned. Thank you.